Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done. Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done.
I'm Katherine White. I'm your host of this weekly Friday Power Lunch, the show that bringing you the guests, the issues, and the action in one big room. And we amplify the voice of the grassroots to get things done and, of course, to make politics fun. And Robbin, when I see you over there, I just want to go, meow, meow, meow. So it is April 1st. Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch. Our theme today is leaving no voters behind. Virginia is my district, our district. And so why not call up my friend, Fennell Norton, our friend of the show, our new co-host. Fennell, how are you doing?
Excited about my conversation with LUANNE today. I think gaslighting is perfect because Cardinal News is a trusted news source. And so I'm excited for folks to get to hear all about that.
Yeah, and I am jazzed up. We have the Commonwealth attorneys here, and that will be getting at that facts and data about criminal, what's really happening in across the country in criminal justice reform. So that's always important. Of course, Tom BONIER's here, and I can't wait to get to that. But before we do that, why don't we show that we have a great video of you that's coming out, Can't Beat Blue by Gary Carter Green. Could we show it? Robbin, get it ready. This is kind of fun. We're not going to gas it too. What?
We'll show it later.
Want to show it later? Okay, Kitty. We'll show it later. I love it. Robbie's a cat. It just makes it so much more fun. All right. So we can put that video. It will be out later. So today's guests, I like to call them up to introduce them. First out of the gate is Tom BONIER, CEO of Targetsmart. Hello, Tom. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. I love the disguise. I didn't know who I was talking to until you took it off. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, April Fools, right? Do you have any good pranks lined up today with data? Or
I don't. My kids always get disappointed when I don't think of something good. So there's still time left in the day, and any suggestions folks have, I'm all ears.
Wasn't it always fun when it was April Fools and you can come home and tell your parents something like, something outrageous and they're like, what? And you're like, April Fools. So,
yes. I'm always fooled. Unsurprisingly, the data guy is always fooled. So yeah, I'm trusting.
Well, we'll see. Well, thank you, Tom. Your second time on the show. We're so glad you're here, and we're going to be so excited to look at what the data shows. So thank you. And next up, we have LUANNE RIFE, the ED of Cardinal News, with us.
It really is. She looks so much better.
I think both cute. Yes. Yeah, so how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, so we can share the news about Cardinal News.
Well, tell me, do you have any great pranks that you have done out in the rural areas? I remember there must be some good ones that you could think of. Tipping cows, gosh. Is that what people did?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't know much about that.
No, I'm teasing.
Yeah, you are. I wish I would have thought of something. Sorry.
I know, that's okay. Well, that's April Fool's Day, how it is. Well, thank you. We really look forward to, because one thing we really know is the news matters. We've been featuring local news this whole couple months, because we really believe that that is how we combat a lot of disinformation and really get out good information. So thank you, LUANNE, for being here. So awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we're really excited. We haven't had them on in a while, but the Commonwealth's attorney, I don't think BIBERAJ is here. She is still in a meeting, but she'll be here later. But we have the wonderful STEVE DESCANO from Fairfax. Hello, how are you, Steve?
Katherine, I'm great and very excited to be here on this April Fool's edition of the show.
I know. I bet you have a lot to tell us. I'm so excited. It's been a while. 2019 doesn't seem like that long ago when we elected for this. And now here we are back, looking forward to next year, making sure you get elected again. So great to see you, Steve.
It's great to be here. Can't wait to get into the conversation.
Yeah. All right. So good. So everybody in the room, glad you're here. Happy Friday. We always need you for our social media. Make sure you follow us on YouTube, you subscribe, you like our videos, you subscribe to the Badass Briefing and the Tuesday Tidbits. Stair, the doggy up there, does such a great job, and she's actually got a lot of compliments recently, and people love getting all that information. So make sure you take advantage of that and stick around for the after chat. Our favorite part is getting in the community and hearing what's happening in your life, and also the news you want to share, to get all of us involved in that. And also be a patron of the show. That really helps us to the day-to-day to keep the lights on. We appreciate that you are supporting us. So thank you very much. And I want to say thank you to our new patron, Holly Joseph. I don't know if you're in the room, but if you are, thank you, Holly, for supporting our show. And I'd like to bring up the crew, if I may, to make sure everybody knows who really gets things done on the show. We have Stair, Ambassador of Buzz, here. How are you doing? There she is. And we have Robbin Warner out sawing wood. Hello, Kitty. How are you?
Hello.
And also Heidi Dragnet, our Twitter guru. Hi, Heidi.
Heidi doesn't have her video on right now.
Well, she was looking good in the
wait. Now she does. Now she does. Okay.
All right. Okay. And last week, some of our Zoom room helpers, Shamira Brown's with us today, Laura Martinez. And then we also have a newcomer liaison for the show, Michelle McKinney. And Michelle got a great idea. Our chat can get quite busy, and some people, newcomers, have questions. So Michelle has taken it upon to help the newcomers on the show. If you have any questions, don't understand some of the acronyms, just message to Michelle McKinney. So thank you, Michelle, and direct message her. And actually you could even email her also. We'll put that in the chat. Does that sound good? All right, thank you. Thank you, team. And thank you to our content concierge, Julie Galdo and Sally Reinhold. Thank you so much. We love everybody participating in it. And so we really appreciate that. So let's get to our next favorite segment, which is the Virginia Grassroots Coalition segment with our fabulous Louisa Borowski.
The update for this week. So last week we talked a little bit about our new House districts, and this week I promised I'd talk a little bit about our new Senate districts. So I got some insight as to which are the Senate seats that we really need to be paying attention to. Obviously, the election is next year, but we are going to start this mantra now, Katherine, which is we are worrying about elections 2022 through 2024. We are not just planning for 1-year elections anymore. We want to make sure we're building a strategy that is going to work for all of our candidates up and down the ballot. So for these Senate seats, there are 3 Senate seats we're looking at specifically at this moment as flip seats. One is SD 17. That is an open seat in Suffolk City and the Isle of Wight down in the Virginia Beach area. That is the seat that Clint Jenkins is going to be running for. We need to get behind Clint now. And if you are working on Luria's race, it is a nice overlap with that congressional district. This is a really important time to get Clint out there and get people excited about his race. Another flip seat is SD 16. There is a Republican incumbent in that seat, but we have a 6.3D positive on that race because of the new district lines. So Schuyler Van Valkenburg is going to be moving over there to run for that Senate seat. We want to make sure he gets as much support now as possible. So that's a possible flip. And then we've got SD 31. That is the incumbent seat of Jill Vogel. And that is a Loudoun County seat. And it is now only 0.7 R. 0.7 is nothing, guys. We need to keep flipping that Loudoun delegation to be as blue as possible. So we're looking at all of those 3 seats as ones we want to get involved in. And then there are going to be some protect seats, and some of these are going to be a little rough, guys. So we want to get involved as soon as possible. The first one is Edwards. He's running an SD4. It's his seat in Roanoke, but it is now a +10 R seat. That is a lot to overcome. It's a name that people know, but it's also a somewhat new district with different lines. We need to be looking at that. Another one is SD24 with Monty Mason in Hampton Roads. It is a 3.5+ R seat now. Not as hard to overcome, but still we're going to need to get some energy down there in the Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area. And then the last one is SD20. This one might be a little too hard to overcome. It is a Hampton Roads seat as well, where Linwood Lewis is currently the delegate for the Dems, but it is now a +15 R seat. So +15, yeah. So as you can see, we have our work cut out for us. I was talking to the Democratic Party of Virginia, and they said, look, if we're thinking about, we're building up to 2023, let's start thinking about it now. And they are a little more concerned about these Senate seats than they are about the House seats. They think the margins in the Senate are a little bit harder for us. So wanted to get you aware of that early, because we are going to start adopting candidates very soon, both for the House and the Senate, whether they're running this year or next year, because we are building momentum. So that is my big update on that. And then I want to share with you 2 calls to action. I'm going to put them in the chat. One is a MVP Mountain Valley Pipeline Twitter storm, which is happening today until 6 p.m. And I'll have the link to the image that you can post. And then there's also an image for supporting the 2022 House of Delegates elections. We still have that possibility to run those House elections this year. And it's really important that we have this opportunity to get our delegates back out there and the new people running for those races, to give them the opportunity to get those seats and get hopefully a majority back in the House of Delegates ASAP. And then the last thing, Katherine, is we do have a Grassroots Coalition meeting on Sunday at 4 p.m. I will put the link to RSVP in the chat. We're going to have some great guests, including Senator Favola, who will talk about our legislative update. We're going to have a criminal justice update from Commonwealth Attorney Tafty, and we're going to be talking about that 2022 through 2024 election strategy.
It couldn't be come at a better time, because that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. Because I love you're talking numbers and these margins, and what we learned last time is, the candidates, we all talked about that. Sometimes those numbers aren't reliable. Like, you can look at them, and like when I went through all the data of all the delegate races, you would think they moved those numbers like so far that even, it was incredible. So when you looked at some of the House delegate races, the Republicans tripled their numbers. So we looked at the numbers and said, oh, we're a safe 3 or 5. Well, no, we really weren't. So I think what we need to do is find our voters now, right? I mean,
exactly. And this is why I think, because elections happen every year in Virginia, we have this opportunity to not treat them as isolated incidents. This is a process. And how are we starting to get voters excited now, not only just to vote for our, candidates for Congress this year, but to say, hey, look, stay with us and get excited about voting for our Senate and House next year.
Yeah. There's a way to do that. We got to contact those voters now, and I'm loving it. So, and make sure that you show up at the coalition meetings. It's a great place to get involved in the grassroots. And also, let's Twitter. I'm hoping we will all do that today and join the storm. I know we're putting it in the chat, so while you're sitting here, tweet away, as we say. All right, Louisa, always great to see you. I hope you have a happy Fool's Day. I'm sure Pittsburgh has a lot of good, funny April Kabasi jokes.
Exactly. Thanks, right? Katherine. Great to see you.
Yeah, don't hide the Kabasi. All right. So I am very excited. Everybody in the room is excited to talk to Tom Bonner. And Tom, great to see you. You can unmute yourself. And I want us to start just on the simple start. Some people may not know Targetsmart. So why don't you just give us a brief overview of Targetsmart, and then about even the election. You were involved with some of that analysis after the Virginia election. You came on to talk about that. And so you're here to talk about what you know now, but let's talk about Targetsmart.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks again for having me on. It's great to see everybody here. So Targetsmart has been around since 2006. We are at our heart a data company. So we build and maintain a national voter file. So it's about, I think, 275 million individuals now. So that includes every registered voter, and then people who aren't registered, for the people that we need to communicate with and get them registered and out to vote. So that's at the center of what we do. And so it's a lot of probably boring work, except to the data nerds, the fellow data nerds on the show. It's just out collecting as much information as we can about voters. In the end, it's all about empowering organizers to make sure, to the point you made a minute ago, it's to make sure that they have accurate information, which comes down to like really simple things, having the right address for someone, making sure that when they move, we know that they moved so we can be communicating with them, especially during COVID when people were moving around a lot, having a cell phone number so you can text and call people. And then just getting accurate information about, especially in Virginia, where we don't have party registration. So having modeled partisanship to know who are the likely strong Democrats and strong Republicans and the people who are maybe in between, looking at issues and ideologies. So that's at the core of what we do. And then on top of that, we have a polling team, we have an analytics team, we have an outreach team, we have a wonderful team of folks that all committed Democrats and progressives working on empowering activists and organizers.
Yeah, data matters. So we know that when you came in the first time, you didn't have the full data, and it took a while for that to be released. And now it's released, and you've had a couple articles out on that, because early on everybody was making their pundits, different candidates, analysts were saying what they thought may have motivated voters, and across the nation it really was this talk about education. So let's dig into that. Your articles are really kind of saying, what is motivating is a little bit more complex than that, what you saw. Now that you have this data, tell us what you found and let's run that down. Let's see where we are with what you saw in the numbers.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. I really give you credit for this, because you're right. What happens is on election night, the hottest of hot takes come out. And those hot takes generally can confirm our priors. Whatever we thought of the world before, that's what the election results confirm. And nationally, the media will pay a lot of attention in the week or two after, and then our attention span shifts. And in reality, we don't get the real data. In Virginia, we didn't get the real data of who actually voted until just recently. And by then, most people have moved on. The narrative has congealed, set in cement at that point, and that's all people are going to pay attention to. So I thank you for the opportunity to give you credit for having me back here to actually talk about what we've actually learned. And as you said, I think that the narrative was very much on election night and in the days after that, it was about education. It was about parents of school children really wanting to take back control of their schools and what their kids are learning. A lot of talk about critical race theory.
Right.
And so that was the first theory that we wanted to test. And the reality is, as you said, yes, education clearly played a role in this election, as it would in any election. Education is always towards the top. But the data doesn't really support the narrative entirely. When we look at the turnout, because again, now we have the individual data of who vote. We don't know for whom. We just know whether or not any individual cast a ballot. We see that the biggest differences in turnout, whether we're looking at the 2020 presidential, which is obviously a different ball game in terms of presidential year turnout, but we look back to 2017, the last gubernatorial, and what we see is the biggest difference from a demographic shift came among seniors. And we're talking about the oldest seniors, age 75 or greater, and rural voters. And so in the end, a lot of this confirms what we thought. We knew that Republicans were fired up. It wasn't that Democrats weren't fired up, by the way. Democratic turnout was pretty good. It was higher than it was in 2017 when we won by a pretty good margin. It's just Republican turnout was so much higher. And I think that's where a lot of this theory came from, that, well, Republicans were fired up about their schools, their kids, in issues like CRT. And in reality, when you look at the age range that typically would be people who have school-age children, so people from maybe the mid to late 20s to, my age or a little bit older, and people approaching their 50s, there wasn't anything remarkable about their turnout. There wasn't a remarkable surge. And so, did CRT have an effect as an issue? Probably, but it was probably on these older voters who don't have kids in school. And that's a whole nother conversation about how that might motivate those voters and why.
Yeah, no, and I really dug around deep on that. But before we go in, I would like to talk about those senior voters and the rural voters. And there's also the younger voters and African-American voters. We saw that, the shift was somewhat depressed. We saw the young voters didn't really come out in greater numbers. And also there was some depression, maybe of the vote, maybe because the candidate, there wasn't issues on the ballot. People weren't talking about issues that got young people excited. I think there is a lot of different reasons for that, right? So you see that also. But going back to this, the senior voter, I was really looking at the numbers in rural areas. And one thing we do know is there is a lot of aged people in those areas. And so you have that movement. And I saw that the numbers that Youngkin had just so overperformed, like 85%, he got, not just, I think last time maybe they got 70 counties when the Republican ran, he got like all 45 at an 85% number of these people hitting the polls. And that was incredible. So I dug into I went through each House delegate, all 100 of them, to look at the vote. What I noticed was the Republicans tripled their numbers, truly, in a lot of these areas there. And then the Democrat either didn't run in a seat. We had 7 seats out in that area that weren't even contested. So you already aren't even full in the game, right? So you don't have a House delegate sitting there. We decided not to run in those 7 seats. We weren't fully on the playing field. And then you had these that went from like maybe 12,000 back in 17 up to 25,000. Like, it was an incredible surge. And so this is where we're getting at. And the thing is, what happened there? What motivated them to get there? Do you have any kind of guesses? I know you were asking for people's insight. Since we last talked, did you have any insight on that?
So yes, and again, the answer is complicated, as these answers usually are. But again, we test theories, and I think one of the bigger theories beyond CRT, beyond what was being taught in schools, was about school closures, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's something that has been, to call it a hot issue is probably underemphasizing it. But at the same time, what was interesting in our analysis is we looked at data on school closures and openings. And basically how many days, because there's great data compiled in Virginia on this, how many days schools were open during the last school year, going from 2020 and 2021, and then last fall into 2021, 2022. And what we found is that there's actually not a correlation between schools being closed and a swing towards Republicans. In fact, the areas that swung the most to Republicans between the 2017 and 2021 governor's races actually were the areas that had the schools open the most, which were these rural communities, mostly in Southwestern Virginia, and these districts that you talk about where you saw this big increase. I mean, the bottom line is Republicans were fired up. And yes, they were fired up by what they were seeing in these communities, but we have to be careful about the lessons we learned from this data, because I think there's been a tendency from Democrats to look at this and say, well, the answer is we need to follow suit with Republicans. We need to mimic them. We need to follow them on these issues. And the reality is there's no evidence that would actually be helpful. And that, I think you made the key point here. when we think about younger voters and voters of color, the core constituencies in Virginia and in any place for Democrats to win, question was, why weren't they energized? And why weren't they enthused? And this is a problem that's not unique to Virginia. We've seen this nationally. When you look at the polling and you look at the favorability of Democrats or of President Biden's job approval, fair or unfair, you look at the segmentation between strong approval and just somewhat approved, because that generally gives us a sign of intensity. And among younger voters, the numbers have never been worse for Democrats. It's not that they disapprove of President Biden's job, the job he's doing. They don't. Overall, when you combine those two together, great numbers. But the numbers are so bad that at one point I thought they were a mistake. The numbers, I think it was from the Quinnipiac poll that came out recently, said only 3% of voters under the age of 30 strongly approved of the job that President Biden was doing. 3%.
Wow.
The next closest group was actually seniors at 12%. Most groups are in the 20s. So we're lacking a sense of engagement and connection with these younger voters. We saw that, and Virginia was the canary in the coal mine, if I may, and that we saw what happened in Virginia. And if we aren't able to answer this question going into the November elections, it'll be a repeat.
No, and I agree. And I do think, looking at the numbers too, and I think, like you said, what we look at data is to try to see if we see a pattern. Like you said, you don't have all the answers. It is complex. You're not sure exactly. It takes longer to figure out the motivation, even maybe talking to voters and exit polls to see what was on their mind. But what we do know is, I think with this campaign, is that the Democrats forgot, I think in some ways, the general campaign 101, elections, how to run a really good campaign. And it felt like to me that Youngkin ran a really good campaign. They chose a candidate that fit their narrative, wasn't Trumpian and all that, but in general, it was on the ground in those rural areas. He left not one voter behind. Targeting, like you do, you really help people target voters, and they really targeted voters, and they communicated with every voter regardless, right? And I mean, Republicans ran in almost every seat except maybe one or two. And like I said, I can't say it enough. When you look at those 7 seats we did not contest in, what you found is Republicans did the opposite. They ran in blue areas where they never ran before. So they're trying to run up the board, and that's in any kind of game. When you start a game, you play basketball or anything, you need all the people on your team. And so we already made that decision. The secondary decision is we didn't really run into the rural areas. We didn't go there, and rural voters said that. There was an article that ran, it was Bath County voters. They said, Democrats don't come here. They don't care about us. They don't show up. We didn't show up out there. And we have been, I think, Sherry Boutros, the Democrat from Illinois, made that big statement that, it's malfeasance. To leave these rural voters behind is not a good strategy. So, touching voters, talking to voters, and what we're talking about this year around infrastructure is so important. So these numbers help us, but they don't tell the whole story. And I saw another article, it was about that Charlottesville area, and we talk about those 7 seats. Did you study that in depth about, that was like that Albemarle area, Charlottesville, and that's where the Confederate statues came down. And what I saw in those 7 seats was this rise of the Confederacy with this vote. I really think it, in my mind, relates to race.
Well, there was no, when we looked at the difference in turnout by age and where younger voters fell off the most, it was actually Charlottesville that was number 1 in the state. The senior surge, and it's not necessarily that younger voters weren't coming out, though they weren't coming out in large numbers. It was that the surge in these senior voters was bigger in the Charlottesville area than anywhere else. And I will say, an inconvenient truth, but when you look at the generation of over the age of 75, it's not to paint a broad brush, because it's a very diverse generation with diverse ideology, and many core committed Democrats in that group and many core committed Republicans, but it tends to be a more Republican group. And when you look at data and studies on racial resentment, which has been studied pretty widely, no generation has a higher level of racial resentment than voters in that age group. And that's something we need to be aware of. And I think that was somewhat on display in what we saw with this turnout. And again, I don't want to simplify it. It's not to say it's too much of a simplification to say that this was racism driven and that's why the surge happened. For some voters, that certainly was part of it, but it was more complicated than that.
Yeah, I don't think it's like we can just say it's racism, right? I think what it is when I say the Confederacy, that area in that history of Charlottesville is where they made the swords for the Confederacy, where so many, what came out of Charlottesville and that history all around this part of Virginia is just deep Confederacy, deep pride about this. And we saw that even when the statues went by, and they, that really caused a lot of the resentment, meaning more about their identity politics and in that cultural wedge. And I think that is where you still see it, the Republican Party trying to use that still, because I think there is these triggers at work. CRT was worked, it got the biggest cheers around. And when I read the reports in the newspaper, that definitely was some of the response of these older folks, is it's like, and plus someone asked them to vote. Like if I look in, for instance, in District 58 with Rob Bell, in 17, he got about 18,000 votes. In 2021, he got 25,000. Matt Ferris, he got 15,000. I'm rounding up, 16,000. And in 17, and then in 2021, he got almost 23,000 more. So somebody was looking for these voters. I mean, that increase, I saw it all across the board, increases of 8,000 to 10,000 per district. And then balanced by where we didn't run, and then them running in blue areas, what you see is that still small margin. It wasn't a blowout. It's 2% he won by, but it was enough for us ignoring what mattered to voters, the issues, and then not speaking to them and not asking them to vote for us.
Amen. In the end, organizing matters, but organizing has to be fueled by messaging, right? We need to be able to communicate. We need to have a message. And that's where local on the ground organizers matter more than anything. It can't be generic. It has to be connected to what matters, especially in traditionally lower turnout elections like the off-year elections in Virginia, including the gubernatorial elections. We need to have that message. You need to ask for their vote. And we didn't have enough of that, right? We had relied on what had worked for the previous 4 years, which was run against Trump, and that was going to fire our people up enough. And sure, that worked for 4 years, but he's not on the ballot. He wasn't on the ballot, despite efforts to the contrary to convince people that Trump was on the ballot. People didn't buy it in Virginia because we didn't give them the reason why they should vote other than believe that this guy, Youngkin, was Trump.
It's just kind of being creative and really being in touch with your grassroots and the people, as that's important. Well, I can go all day in this because I really did. I went deep and I went to every district, and I was like shocked when you could actually, just to see that surge, you can feel it. And in those areas where rural voters are older typically as well. But let's talk about the early vote. Is anything let's go just real quick before, I know we have only a couple more minutes. Anything you saw in the early vote that was significant in that turnout?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the early vote ended up being fair because we get the early vote early, appropriately. Mm-hmm. We can see that basically in real time before the election. So we pay a lot of attention to it because the vote history takes many months to come out after that. And generally what we saw in the early vote was indicative of what we saw. In the early vote, we saw a severe lag in younger voters coming out. Right. We're still seeing the same skew that we saw from 2020, which is, I think, what we will see nationally. And that Republicans have, for the most part, abandoned voting before election day. Not entirely, but President Trump sent out the signal that it's voting fraud, and so fewer of them do that. In the end, that can be an advantage for Democrats going forward. That we need to continue to invest in that. And thankfully, we're not facing, and hopefully we don't face that, Virginia. What other states where Republicans have taken control, where they've limited that.
No, and I thought there was an article though saying, and I have it in my notes somewhere, about the early vote and Youngkin, that he did actually at some point go out with these buses and these poll places and have rallies and have people go straight in. Because I think we saw definitely like you said, the numbers were lower, but I don't know if there was a surge.
Yeah, they did. Republicans are using. I mean, I think this is one area where I think Republicans in general have had frustrations with. Basically, it was a one-man show, as many things happened with Trump. Because Republicans used to rely on early voting and vote by mail, especially, as their advantage. And so, yeah, Republicans are still investing in it and trying to push back. And so, again, important that we continue to invest in that on our side.
How about college voters, the college and then non-college educated? Let's talk about white voters.
We're still seeing, that sort of segmentation, to the extent that college educated white voters fled the GOP under Trump. Most of that has held up. There was some backsliding when you see the performance in places like Loudoun County and some of these communities where they had frankly gotten so much better for Democrats. Some of that was connected to Trump, and Youngkin did better with college educated white voters than Trump did, but the Democratic trajectory is still strong. Now, the bigger challenge, again, which is connected to what we're talking about, the rural communities, is how do we continue to make inroads, or at least not let Republicans do nearly as well as they did with less educated white voters, especially in rural communities.
Yeah, we saw that definitely, that number surge where, like you said, the college educated kind of stayed steady in certain areas, maybe picked off a few, but it was really in that space that Youngkin was able to appeal to. And, obviously that was something a couple of years ago, they were trying to find that issue, and I will have the Commonwealth attorneys on here later. And one thing they love they scare women about crime or safety issues, and then they went to the school issue and try to take advantage and wedge in there with schools and teaching subjects. And you see it now; it's exploded with banning books, censoring books, which I think at some point will backfire. I don't think Americans are up for censoring and all this, but they've taken it to quite the extreme. So anyways, but thank you, Tom. It's 12:40. So there's anything you want to leave us with that you'll be doing that's on your mind, looking at the data further?
Again, I just like to say that I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate folks paying attention and being willing to sort of look at these things after the fact and take the time to understand these things, because it does matter. It answers the question in terms of the next election and how we can be smarter. That's what we're focusing on, and we're going to continue to focus on this in Virginia and other states. What does it mean, and how can we be smarter about our targeting going into not only this election, but into the next presidential, which, believe it or not, is right around the corner.
Well, I think you termed that silver surge. I think that you own that. I think that reminds me of this, what is that, the silver sneakers? The generation of that. They just marched those silver sneakers to the polls. And, one thing that, the takeaway for me was they really didn't get the swing voters. They got just really into their base of Republican leaning groups and people, and they went hard at that.
They got them out.
And I can't help myself, but I was thinking when I was looking at the numbers in the rural areas, I think these people could have been even former Democrats. I just don't feel like I feel like finally someone asked them about voting and really reached them somehow, and they really felt motivated to get to the polls, for their big, whatever appealed to them. If it was feeling that they saved their country, or they felt that Democrats were offering all this, taking away their lifestyle that they were proud of, or, who knows, but we'll get more into the details. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much, and good to see you. So thank you,
Tom. Good to see you too. Happy April Fools.
I can't wait to hear about your prank. I'll see you on Twitter.
I'll report back
on Twitter. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. So that was really great. I do think that for Democrats, it's something that we have to think about, because we know a lot of the stuff that went on that you can control, which is how we run. Fennell, do you want to pop in here with me? Right? What are you thinking, candidate? We talked about this yesterday. Some of the mechanics of how we do things.
Yeah, this was so interesting, and I'm hoping that we can have more conversation with Tom. I think my takeaway is that we really have to understand who our voters are and who they aren't. Republicans did that very well, which means that our messaging has to be focused to our audience, and it has to be something that they believe in and that they're as passionate to come out as the other side. And then along the way, I think his point about not having this messaging that's just, one big message, but really looking at who your audience is. And there are Republicans who would be interested in what we have to say if we message it appropriately. So I think we have lots of work to do. I don't think we leave any district, we don't leave anybody behind. And if we get ourselves together strategically, we can do this thing in 22.
I know. I think that's what we said. We have to stand by these just indicators that just are smart campaigning. You run at every seat. You support people that run. You message voters. You reach them. You respect them. On and on and on. So I know we have our work to do. But this is going to be interesting because your segment's up next. Am I correct? I'm not even looking at the board. So, April Fools.
Okay, I'll get you later.
Okay, go ahead. Are we, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, I'm waiting for LUANNE. So you
have to call her up. Spotlight LUANNE. There she is, all the way from Virginia. I'll let you have at it.
Well, thank you, LUANNE. I'm so glad that we get to do this today. And so I'm going to let you just talk a little bit about trusted, independent, unbiased news, especially in rural communities, and how you got there with Cardinal News.
Sure, I could probably talk for an hour about that. And it's really interesting to hear what Tom had to say, because a lot of that is what motivated us to create Cardinal News. So Dwayne Yancey, who's our executive editor, and we both were at the Roanoke Times for a really long time, which was a really great paper. And and as has happened, and as you've seen with all the papers across the state, ownership got consolidated and things changed and staffing cuts came. It had gotten to the point where we would no longer be able to do any in-depth stories. For Dwayne, who many of the people on here know is, just a really astute political writer, his breaking point came when the Roanoke Times decided it could no longer afford to have a political reporter. So, you talk about rural Virginia, we're covering 1 million people. I mean, that's, a substantial portion of Virginia to go without any coverage. And so what has happened across the papers that are owned by Lee Enterprise is that, the political coverage comes from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. It's very good coverage. It's great, but it's a state look or a Richmond focus. And so you're not finding out in Roanoke anymore or in the surrounding communities what your legislature is doing. You're not hearing about the issues that matter to you. And so we wanted to tell those stories. And what's quite interesting is two things that Tom had said in his presentation is one, election night, we had a story go up that said it was the rural turnout. We had analysis that looked into, how the people in really far Southwest Virginia that everyone discounts, and I'm not even sure how much the Republicans campaigned out there. No one listens to what they say, and they had a huge influence and a huge impact on that election. Number two, you talked about redistricting. Well, when the maps came out, there are stories about how the districts shift, but they're all focused on, what's happening sort of in Richmond area and so on. And, you mentioned Edwards district. Well, we had stories up right away to say, this is how it's shifting in our area. This is what you should be paying attention to. So really, when we started this, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to tell in-depth stories, connect the dots, look at the trends, so that we as people know more about ourselves and our communities and aren't just turning to a source to echo our own thoughts. And secondly, we wanted to tell the stories in a way that the people in the political and economic centers of Virginia who are making decisions about our lives and our livelihoods knew who we were, knew who we are, know about our issues. And so we're succeeding at that. We look at our analytics and we are just amazed that when we pull up a bubble map of our readers, We have huge concentration of readers, of course, in the Roanoke and New River Valley. We have, big bubbles over Lynchburg and far southwest. But our second biggest bubble of readers is in Richmond.
Wow.
So it tells us that, they're hearing us.
So here's what I think is interesting, and you've mentioned it, and it was a quote that you said, and you said it was stories that tell our stories. So can you talk a little bit about what you mean about that and how you think is so relevant to folks who want to understand the folks who read Cardinal News, which should be all of us, frankly.
Right. So, we so often have felt where, bigger media or whatever, they swoop in and they do these stories about, the typical stereotypes about what rural Virginia looks like. Sometimes I wonder if we even wear shoes. But we're doing really interesting things. We're covering Southwest Virginia, and we're going out into, the former coal fields where they're trying to reinvent their economy. We're covering Southside Virginia, where, they're developing a whole new economy that's coming, after the textile and tobacco. And there's really good stories to be told. We have stories about, just really interesting things that people are doing to try and reinvent the economy. And, they're not the stereotype stories.
I think the other thing that's so interesting is that you guys really don't have allegiance to anyone. And it's when we talk about trusted news sources, that's really important, where people feel like they can go and get good news that's balanced, that's nonpartisan. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important and how you guys fund yourselves?
Sure. So, we decided from day one that we wanted to be really transparent about who's supporting us and how we're doing this. So our model, similar to public broadcasting, we rely on donations from individuals, corporations, and foundations. We were really fortunate to get a big boost right from the start from the Secular Society, which issued a really nice challenge grant that was matched by Carilion Clinic and Dominion Energy, which gave us enough money to go public and say, this is what we're going to do. So when we announced that we were going to start at the beginning of September of 2021, just a few months ago, we had about a dozen donors, which included us, the board members, right? Today we have more than 1,200 individuals who are giving us money. We published on our website every single one of our donors. We acknowledge in the stories if we're writing about someone who has given us more than $5,000, we disclose that. We do this all in real time. We looked around at what the industry standards that are starting to be developed around nonprofit news. And there's INN, the Institute for Nonprofit News, which has accepted us into membership and what they require. And we just decided, we're going to just put it all out there for everyone to know what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Very good. So let me just ask this. So in terms, I've looked through the paper as well online, and I think the information will be there so that all the folks on today will be able to sign up for the newspaper as well. But you talked about your political writer and really the news that you guys had right after the election and how on the ground it was. I would love for you to tell me about one of the articles that fascinated you the most that Yancey did.
Okay, so Yancey is the executive editor and he writes analysis. We have a political reporter who lives in Richmond, is based in Richmond, Marcus Schmidt, who covers our area for that. So what's really interesting is it's some of the stories that have the most hits that we see people coming to and that are passed around on social media and have longevity are ones when we write about demographics that really crunch down into, who exactly we are, where things are growing, where things are shifting, which communities people are moving into. We've got a lot of stories about, broadband and how it is bringing in people who can work and live anywhere, and how communities are priming themselves for that. And they're bringing in, we're seeing that the people who are coming to read those aren't just people in our area. They're coming from outside to read that. So it shows me that there is a great interest in that.
Wow, that is fascinating. I'm from a rural community myself. Broadband is one of our top issues. We talk about, the jobs that can happen, that can be brought into your communities because of broadband. So that's pretty significant. Also on our show today, there are lots of people who like to do letters to the editor, who have lots of things to say. How would one make themselves heard at the Cardinal News?
So we don't really accept letters to the editor at this point. We wanted to really elevate, and I don't mean this in a bad way about letter writers, but we wanted to really elevate the conversation. And so we don't even really accept op-eds that are just sent in either. We do publish them on occasion, but they need to be from someone who knows what they're talking about, has the credentials to back up what they're saying. And we just don't allow anybody to come in and make up their own set of facts. Of course, we do have social media presence where people do chat away about our stories. Dwayne and I are both reachable by phone or email at any time if somebody wanted to talk about a particular story. But we do accept, we have published some op-eds, but they are by people who really know their subject matter.
Okay. And I also think I heard you say about freelancers. You guys take freelancers sometimes too, is that right?
Oh, yes. We have quite a stable of freelancers, all journalists who, are just doing great work for us until we can build up some more funding and hire some more staffers, because that's really the goal.
Wonderful. I see Katherine's back.
Yeah.
Katherine, do you have any last words for Lou
Well,
Andy?
I'm just going to say that I'm so glad we had you on, because I started now reading Cardinal News, and it is really fantastic. And I think it's so important when we talk with Tom about messaging, and Fennell's on that messaging team, that really being that trusted voice in the rural areas, getting the facts out really is helpful. In society, you see that nationwide, globally, this disinformation is actually the biggest plague of democracy. And it's really great that you're building that community. So I appreciate you coming here. We're up to time, so I need to get the Commonwealth attorneys on. Wait, don't. Well, LUANNE, bye. You just sort of popped away.
Bye.
LUANNE, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think our kitties and dogs are just fast on their trigger pause. There you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, LUANNE.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's great. So people, please subscribe and read, especially if you're in politics. This is what you should be reading every day in newspapers around. So with that, thank you, Fennell. Well, let's get up the Commonwealth attorneys. I know BUTA is back in the room. I'm so excited to welcome the people that we elected to be Commonwealth attorneys in Virginia, BUTA BIBERAJ, and also STEVE DESCANO from Fairfax. BUTA's out in Loudoun. How are you both?
Good afternoon.
Great. Excited to be here.
I know, so I won't have you step on each other. We're glad that you waited. I'm sorry, we love to talk, so that's a problem. But let me just say a few things, and then I'll go to BUTA and then to Steve, is that it was very exciting to get you elected. We know that criminal justice reform, specifically, that was a big movement to really change things, and you were elected, and we elected Carissa in Arlington as well. So let's just talk about, I'll start with you, BUTA, about the criminal justice reform out in Loudoun. For you, it seems like, you both are going through these recalls as well. It's been a constant kind of, just to get this conversation started. You guys, I know it's been not easy. Society is not making it easy for you. So tell us, what is going on in Loudoun? How has the job been? And what reforms are you trying to implement out your way?
And thank you for having me. And I will also say thank you for having Steve on, because I think we can speak about the benefits of what the voters have done by electing us in Northern Virginia. And that also includes Parissa as well as Amy Ashworth out of Prince William County. So in Loudoun County, what we have done is we have put together a broader group that is supporting our victims for domestic violence and sexual assaults. And that was a commitment that I made when I was running, because we realized that the resources that we were using for low-level offenses and nonviolent offenses were stealing the resources away from our more significant and more violent crimes. So I think that was one of the things that we decided to do, is that we needed to make sure that we were focusing on meeting the needs of the victims where we can. And these are cases that are very hard to get charged to begin with, and then to prosecute because they're very sensitive. So what we then did in our office is we've tried to take those lower level nonviolent offenses and redirect them from the court system where we can and where appropriate. So that what we're doing is we are navigating those to be able to have those matters heard by our judges, or maybe even taken out of the courts where we can. The invitation to do this came from the voters. The endorsement came from the voters. And then for us doing the job, we've had some very strong, very well-organized outside influencers to try to take us out of those positions or out of the focus out of our hands to be able to do that. So I'm going to let you transfer over to Steve, and then I think we can answer the question as far as the recall efforts, and I can speak to that anytime you want.
Yeah, sure, because I'm excited. Steve, you're in my district, so I'm so proud to have you there. Tell us how things have been since you've been in office. It's been interesting 2 years, I'm sure. Has it been just 2? Is it almost 3?
It's been a little bit over 2, but sometimes it feels like 200. But no, seriously, Catherine, it is going really, really well. What we're doing in our office is we are threading the needle and making sure that we're building a system that's focused on justice, but also keeps us safe. We've been able to do that. So right now in Fairfax County, we have the lowest jail population we've ever had. And last year, crime was down almost 10%. And we've been able to do that by implementing a lot of changes around getting rid of cash bail, changing our sentencing, trying to making sure we're treating kids like kids, more diversion programs, and also, just reorganizing the office. I know I've created a special unit to do nothing but sex crimes prosecution. I've created another special unit to do nothing but domestic violence cases. So we are really doing the deal where we're building a fair and just system that keeps us safe. And it's just a shame that people who should know better, like our Attorney General Jason Miyares, wants to try to use victims' pain for political gain and rely on people's unfamiliarity with the system to try to spin a narrative that, quite frankly, has no basis in reality.
No, and I think that's like having Tom on with the data, and you were quick. I saw you with your Twitter talking. The data shows that actually crime is down. And I think it's the easiest thing to manipulate in people's minds is to scare people. You saw that with Judge Jackson, right? They went right to, she's a prosecutor. Do you have any comments on that when you're watching that as a prosecutor?
If I may answer that, yes. If you look at that, what they did is they attacked her for every function that she served as a lawyer.
Yes.
We are sworn in as lawyers. We're sworn to uphold the Constitution. That's one of the first things that we swear to do. As prosecutors, we are equally sworn to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state, as well as our localities. So when you have somebody who says, this is what she did when she was a public defender, that she was representing these individuals who, not their words, my words, like, who are unworthy of representation. At the end of the day, we have to remember this. The system works if the system works. And the only way it will work is if we have strong individuals who are representing the process all the way through and through, strong public defenders and defense attorneys, strong prosecutors, and strong judges. Then fewer mistakes are made. Mm-hmm. When we start chastising somebody for being a strong defender, honestly, that's a cop-out, and that is the vitriolic demonization of having a system that says what we're going to do is we're going to protect the Constitution and make sure that we don't make mistakes. So if you demonize her for those roles, then what you're doing is, again, you're fear-mongering, and that's what goes on in those hearings.
Yeah, and I think Steve could speak to this too. I think that's the struggle we're in politically right now. It's so politicized that it's being used. And do you have any comments on that, Steve?
I do, particularly on that point that you just made, Catherine. We see, and I'm so glad you brought up the Supreme Court confirmation hearings, because what we're seeing is that this is not the complaints that BUTA and I are getting. This is part of a coordinated Republican strategy at all levels, at the local level, at the AG's level, and at the national level. As a matter of fact, it should be no surprise to anybody that last week the Attorney General was up here in Northern Virginia talking about starting a new pact to get progressive prosecutors like BUTA and myself removed from office, and it was all based on national money. So make no mistake, this is a bad faith political argument that Republicans have coalesced around that has no basis in reality, but they think can get them political gains. You want to talk about gaslighting? At the beginning of it, this is the gaslighting.
It is gaslighting. And I think it's kind of, like I said, it's an easy thing to do, because you can, when you're making these with judges, and like you said, you work all together, that sometimes there are things that can happen where somebody does reoffend or do something. This happens, but they could, I think the Republicans' point of view, or let's just say the other side, is just lock people up, throw the key. And we know that United States has the largest incarceration, maybe behind Saudi Arabia or Iran or something, or China. Like, we are rated, and I feel like we can do better. And when we're locking up people for too long and then no rehabilitation, what kind of society is it? And I think the voters are obviously asked for this kind of reform. So we're at the top of the hour. So I want to make sure they have a few takeaways on the recall. What are your comments on that? And how can people in the room get involved with your campaign in the future?
So with the recall, I will say this, and I know, Katherine, you and I have spoken about that on a number of levels. The recall obviously is impacting in Loudoun County the school board members, as well as now directed at my office and my position. What it is, it's a lot of intentional disinformation, where they are trying to fire people up to indicate that we are not keeping the community safe. And that's the furthest from our efforts as well as our successes. In Loudoun County, as well as in the other jurisdictions, what we've been doing as prosecutors is being more innovative. Rather than checking the box and saying we prosecuted and we incarcerated, now we're looking at how do we address the root problem. The majority of crimes that are committed are from a mental health or a drug addiction source. Right. If we don't address the root, guess what? That just keeps continuing. We have the recidivism, and it goes on and on and on. We don't know. So we have to figure out a way how to stabilize our communities. And that's what we're doing within our offices, to try to focus on how do we provide the appropriate consequence and the appropriate services so that somebody is held accountable, but they're not coming back in and out of the system. Right. How to be able to support us, honestly, help us message, help us, by talking to us and saying, you know what, this is what they're saying, this is the way I hear it, which may be indicative of the community. And we would like for you to respond to the following so that we don't accept as fact the disinformation. I have restarted my efforts now to make sure that we are able to respond by getting a communications team together. I am on Act Blue under my name, BUTA BIBERAJ, and you're welcome if you want to support us in that way. The other way would be really is to spread the word. So thank you.
Yeah, we've showed up out there for school board and different things, because it feels like, and Steve, I'll let you also talk about this. It feels like our society, every civil part, every part from the school board is under attack, divisive, trusted partners like teachers. It is a concerted effort, it feels like, to unravel our community and our civility. So Steve, how are you doing with all the different efforts? What's going on with you?
Well, I see it the same way you do, Katherine. It is a concerted effort at all levels. And I think that, we're taking it and we're actively pushing our message, which is the truth. We're actively talking to community members. So really what I would ask, echoing a little bit of what BUTA have said, is when you're talking to your neighbors, when you're talking to your friends, if you have the information, you know the facts, please don't hesitate to stand up for us. As a matter of fact, I just had my chief of staff, Ben Schneider, put in the statistics from crime being down at Fairfax, about 10% for anybody. I saw people who wanted it. And then also just kind of get involved. Follow me on Twitter at Steve Descano, same on Facebook. If you want to donate, make a contribution to help us fight the recall, we'll take that too. But really, what we have to remember is that the people of Northern Virginia in Fairfax and in Loudoun, they wanted this because they know the data supports what we're doing. We're building safer communities. And we just ask you to help keep your friends and neighbors in that right frame of mind by having the conversations instead of giving into fear mongering.
Well, one thing too, I don't know, it's this past year, the sheriffs out in, this rural Virginia came forward. They were so overwhelmed with the jails filled with mental health people that they asked for help. And I don't know whatever happened. I mean, they literally all came out and said, we need help. Our jails, we're not really doing our job because these people they shouldn't be in prison. They need to be in a mental health institution, but we're using our jails. This is what we're doing to people. And the officers are like asking for help. And I think there's a lot of space there for us to continue this work and for all sides. And we're really leaving people behind when we're not really addressing the problems of society and so on. So I appreciate your being here today, hanging in here with us. Happy April Fool's Day. I hope to hear about probably good pranks every day in your office. Who knows? Not sure. Okay.
My 10-year-old has a toothpaste-filled Oreo waiting for her later today. She doesn't know it yet, but she has one.
Yeah, maybe you can come in with the big wig. You can get yourself a big blonde wig today and walk in the house.
More of an April Fool's joke on me, but I'll take it.
Yeah, you take it. No, I'm teasing. You know I love you. All right. Favorite. Okay. Thank you so much for being there with us today. And I want to round up the show because we always want to make sure you come back next Friday. We're doing it every Friday. And thank you to our guest today, Tom Bonier. So great to see you. LUANNE Rife. Thank you very much. And our Commonwealth attorneys, STEVE DESCANO and BUTA BIBERAJ. Thank you so much for being here. Hang around for the after chat. We have a lot to talk about. We got to get into action, my friends. And have yourself a great day. See you in the after chat.